How's it going, folks? Welcome back to the channel. So today I wanted to take a look at this setting right here, dynamic settings. Now, by turning this on in the sim, you can give the sim a frame rate target, and it will then try and achieve that frame rate while dynamically adjusting settings under the hood. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds awfully familiar. This sounds a little bit like AutoFPS, which of course we have looked at on the channel before. So what I wanted to do today was do a little bit of a deep dive and see whether it's worth using AutoFPS or whether we can get what we need from using the dynamic settings built right into the sim. Of course, there is the argument that if you can get close to what AutoFPS gives you directly from the sim without needing third-party add-ons, maybe it's best to play it safe and stick with the defaults, but let's find out. Before we do though, a massive thanks to Tobii for sponsoring this video. Their Tobii Eye Tracker 5 tracks your head and your eye movements, which us simmers can use for looking around the cockpits of our aircraft, and it's become a core part of my simming setup. Over the last year or so, I found it particularly useful when taxiing around airports, especially when connected to the VATSIM network, where you have to be on the top of your game. If you're a glasses wearer, fear not, so am I. The Tobii Eye Tracker 5 works just fine with or without glasses. It also works in a dimly lit room. I can vouch for that, as I do a lot of my simming in a very dim, windowless garden shed. It also comes with mounting options for both curved and flat screens. From January the 22nd through to February the 10th, 2025, Tobii are running a promotion where, using my affiliate link in the video description, you can get 15% off a Tobii Eye Tracker 5. If you're genuinely in the market for one, this is a great way to support the channel at no extra cost to you. And if you're feeling lucky, during the same time period, Tobii are running a sweepstake. I'll leave a link to that in the video description, and I'd encourage you to sign up and wish you the very best of luck. Thanks again to Tobii for sponsoring this video. As for my graphic settings, we're kind of using a tweaked version of the ultra graphic settings. I've got a video all about it. The only thing I've changed really since making that video is the texture resolution. I had that set to ultra in my video. I'm now using high, as I found that did use quite a lot of VRAM when set to ultra, but otherwise pretty much the same. We are running at 4K, of course, and we are using TAA, and we'll be testing different resolutions and things like that as we go. So yeah, buckle up. Let's jump in and see what we can find. Okay, we are at Edinburgh V2 by Pirigui in the Fenix A320, and we're going to do a takeoff roll and see what happens. We're at 4K. We're not running AutoFPS. We're not running dynamic settings. So this is just 4K out of the box, and we're getting around, what, 36, 37 here. But we'll see what happens on the takeoff roll. So let's get on with that and see what happens to our FPS. Yeah, there we go, look. There we go. Down into the 20s we go on the takeoff roll. Less than ideal during a critical phase of flight. You really want to be above 30. Now, as we take off and get airborne, hopefully it will start to recover. Yeah, I'm starting to see 40s now. Okay, and just to prove a point, we're going to do the same test in 1080p. Same graphic settings, same everything else, but 1080p, just to get rid of that GPU pressure that we were seeing before. So let's just do a takeoff roll. And you can see, despite being at 1080p, we are back down in the 20s on this takeoff roll, which is less than ideal. Every time I do some testing in 4K, I usually get people in the comments straight away saying, oh, it's because you're at 4K. And, well, now we're at 1080p, and you can see we've still got the same issue. The FPS now should start to recover. Now we're airborne. Yeah, now we're into the 40s. That's much, much better. Okay, so we've seen how the sim reacts in 4K and in 1080p. Obviously, we're more GPU bottlenecked at 4K, but even at 1080p, we saw that we were down into the 20s on the takeoff roll due to being main thread limited. So it's clear that we do need some help. So let's run AutoFPS now, and we'll see if that can help us in any way. For those that haven't seen the prior videos, AutoFPS is a third-party tool that dynamically adjusts your terrain level of detail, your object level of detail. It can also do clouds. It can do a lot of stuff. It's a really cool app, although it is a third-party app, and it's frowned upon, perhaps even not allowed, I think, to talk about it in the official Microsoft Flight Sim forums. So what we're trying to find out today is, can we use the built-in solution to get a similar result to AutoFPS, and we'll compare the results. So let's start with AutoFPS and see how things fare for us on a takeoff roll in 4K Okay, here's AutoFPS. I've kind of got it here in the bottom right. Apologies, it is covering up some of our telemetry down here, but I think we can live without that for now. And you can see here the train level of detail. AutoFPS has already dropped this to 50 because we're on the ground. AutoFPS kind of thinks, well, actually, if you're not up high, you're not going to be able to see very far, therefore you don't need an insane terrain level of detail, because what can we see here besides the runway and a bit of grass? Not a lot, so it does make sense. Object level of detail, it's left alone at 100, and it's targeting 37 FPS, and lo and behold, that's roughly what we're getting. So let's do a takeoff roll and see if it can hold its own more than what the sim did without any assistance. Right, keep an eye on that FPS. Are we going to dip into the 20s like we did last time? $33, $34. Let's take off. It would appear that we didn't. The 1% lows did go to 29, 0.1% lows 28, which is actually quite tidy, all things considered. There we go now, so terrain level of detail is up to 200. You might find as you get up to cruise, it can go even higher. You see here we've got a terrain level of detail max. I've set it to 200 because I feel like 200 is a reasonable number, but you could set this to 300 or 400, so if your system can have the extra room to take you to 300, maybe while you're at cruise or whatever, it can do it. Then as you start getting lower, coming into land, for example, where you need that performance, then it can start dynamically bringing it down. It's a really nice bit of kit. It's just unofficial, and I know some people would maybe rather not run a third-party tool like this and would maybe rather stick to the defaults. The question is, can the defaults get us what we need? So let's find out. Okay, so I've disabled AutoFPS. We're now going to go back to what the sim has for us built in. So we're going to use the dynamic settings. We'll turn this on, we'll expand it, and we've set ourselves a frame rate target of 35. AutoFPS was kind of auto-targeting 37, so I think 35 is a reasonable number to go for. Now, the first thing I notice over here on the right-hand side is it says Detail Adaptation 1.23. So if we were to turn the dynamic settings off, will that go back to 1.0, I wonder? Yeah, it has. It's gone back to 1.0, so you can see that even just sat here doing nothing on the ground, it is doing something, so that's good. I'm always wary with features like this where it doesn't quite expose all the data like AutoFPS does. You're kind of wondering, like, are you actually doing anything? But it seems like from this, it is. So let's turn it back on. And yeah, detail adaptation is 1.23. I'm not entirely sure what 1.23 means. Does that mean it's kind of brought us down by like 23%? I don't know, but hopefully the proof will be in the pudding. So let's do a takeoff roll here and see if we can prevent ourselves dipping down into the 20s like we saw at the beginning of the video where we had no assistance, be it from AutoFPS or dynamic settings. Come on. You can do it. I really hope this works. I mean, that's not as good, but also it's not bad, is it? That's not bad. 1% lows, 27, 0.1% lows, 23. So on the 1% lows, we're a couple of FPS lower than what AutoFPS got us. But on the whole, I would say that takeoff roll to me felt good. It felt smooth enough. And obviously now we're up in the air. Everything's fine, and you can see detail adaptation has now gone to 1.0, so much like AutoFPS, it felt the pressure when we were on the ground during the takeoff roll. Now we're kind of up and away. Things are a lot more chill. Alright, bit of a change of scene. We're at JFK Airport in the Airbus A330 by iniBuilds. It comes default with the plane. Now this combination in the past has given us quite a lot of issues, so I'm just going to do a quick takeoff roll here with no assistance from dynamic settings, AutoFPS, so this is just 4K, my graphic settings. Currently at about 40 FPS, but obviously we're sat here doing nothing, so let's see what happens during the takeoff roll. Alright, keep an eye on that FPS, because it's during the takeoff roll that historically we had the problems. 33, 32, 30, 29 I just saw there. $28. I mean, not terrible, not as bad as it used to be, I don't think. Yeah, it feels like the lowest I really felt there from the sim FPS counter was like, mind you, it's dipping now, isn't it? Look at that. Main thread limited. That's not good. This is a stuttery mess. Okay, good job I persevered through the takeoff phase a bit more. 1% lows, 0.1% lows, 9 FPS. That's really not great, but as we kind of pull away from the airport now, getting up into the 30s, well, dip it again now into the 20s. Yeah, okay, so suffice to say, I think that was a less than ideal experience. So let's restart it. Let's try our dynamic settings and see if that can rescue us. Okay, we're back and we've got dynamic settings enabled. Look how we're getting a different value here to what we had at Edinburgh. We've got a detail adaptation of 1.38. So to me, that would seem that there's more detail adaptation going on here, possibly because Manhattan's so close by. In fact, if you sort of look out into the distance, you can't really see an awful lot of Manhattan, which might be the train level of detail maybe being dropped to 50. Again, we don't really know. It doesn't really tell us a lot of detail like AutoFPS did. But let's do a takeoff roll now. We've still got our FPS target set to 35, so I'm guessing when it gets to 35, it will start pulling some levers for us. Detail adaptation now, changing on the fly, 1.3, 1.32, that's fine. Let's go on with this takeoff roll and see what happens. Okay, just a very, very slight dip there as my throttles went to toga, but it is maintaining 30, well, I say it was maintaining at 35, we're now sort of 33, 34, dipping down to the low 30s. Come on. Come on, you can do it. Stay above 30 for me. 29. Ah, damn it. Okay, let's rotate. Get out of here. Now, are we going to get those dips shortly after takeoff that we had last time? Seems more stable this time, doesn't it? Definitely seems more stable. Detail adaptation now at 1.41. Okay, so fair enough, we did see like a 29 FPS there from the sim counter at least on the takeoff roll, which is below 30, albeit only by 1. 1% lows at 27 FPS, which again isn't that bad, similar to what we saw at Edinburgh. You are going to get the odd dip here and there. I mean, it's flight sim. Like that's, I feel like that's an unreasonable expectation to say, oh, it's going to be perfectly smooth 100% of the time. You're always going to get little dips. So 0.1% lows whenever you're doing benchmarking in flight sim, they're always going to hit the floor, because at some point during the test, the sim's sort of going to go boop and stutter, and then that's going to be reflected in your 0.1% lows. 1% lows, less susceptible to that stuff. But yeah, I would say that was a good result. Okay, so just a thought I had there as we were doing that last takeoff run is like we set our FPS target at 35, but then obviously we saw the frames per second go down to like 29-ish. If we were to set a higher target, such as, rather than say putting it to 35, what if we put it to 45? Will that make us less likely to dip below 30 FPS in real terms? I don't know, let's find out. Okay, so we've set the limit to 45, and our FPS now is currently at 40 FPS. Obviously, you know, we're limited by main thread. There's only so much our hardware can do. Like, we could put in a target of 1,000 FPS. It doesn't mean it's going to get it. But I'm just curious if it means that maybe we're less likely to dip below 30 FPS if we set our FPS target just that little bit higher. Currently at 45 FPS. So let's run this takeoff roll. Keep an eye on those numbers. Full power. There's your first little stutter. 0.1% lows, now down to 9 FPS. Kind of what I expected one of those. You're always going to get one of those. And I did feel that through the sim. I knew that happened immediately. Alright, 31, 32, 30. Not seeing a 20 yet, but I feel like it's going to happen any time now. Yeah, there it is, 29. Okay, so that theory is perhaps out the window then, isn't it? That setting a higher target will make it more aggressive and therefore stop you going below 30 FPS occasionally. Detail adaptation still at about 1.41, so I would say there's probably not a lot of difference between setting a target, for me at least, at 35 or 45. But it does seem to work. Alright, just for the sake of completeness, we're going to do the same takeoff roll now with AutoFPS in the Airbus A330 here at JFK, and you can see the target FPS that AutoFPS has automatically determined is 32 FPS. A little bit lower than what we saw at Edinburgh. I think Edinburgh it was targeting 37, so that probably just goes to show that we are generally in a more stressful environment here, and AutoFPS is reflecting that, but you can see train level of detail has dropped all the way down to 50. So let's get on with this takeoff roll and see what kind of performance we get. Alright, let's go. 35 FPS we're down to. In general, as you progress down the runway here, the FPS does start to dip away, so we're now seeing 31, 32. Are we going to see 20? Yeah, there it is, 28, 29. So similar to what we saw with the default dynamic settings built into the sim. And let's rotate the aircraft. A little bit of a stutter there. Not entirely sure whether that's AutoFPS's fault. I mean, the sim is, you know, even on its best day, can be a little bit like that. So it would seem similar results, although look, AutoFPS has taken our clouds down to high, albeit there aren't any clouds at the moment, but you can see it's clearly struggling, and clouds is one of the things that it can, you know, drop to help you with FPS, something I don't think the default dynamic settings can. I think it just does terrain level of detail and object level of detail. I'm not 100% sure. You can see now that as we start to climb, the terrain level of detail does start to, you know, dynamically bring itself back up. We're now into the 70s, and as a result, Manhattan's just appeared in front of us. There is some advice that some people say, rather than setting your terrain level of detail minimum to 50, set it to 75, then you're less likely to get kind of that pop-in that we just saw from Manhattan there. Alright folks, so hopefully that's been of interest to you. So we saw at Edinburgh that the AutoFPS was slightly better than the default dynamic settings built into the sim, but then we've got to consider that the dynamic settings is a first-party solution. It's built into the sim, it's one tick, it's set it and forget it. And of course, AutoFPS is a third-party app that is kind of frowned upon, I think, by you know, Asobo and Microsoft Flight Simulator officially. I think even talking about it in their forums can get you into a little bit of trouble. So the fact that we now have something like this in the sim by default is a really good step. Yes, it's probably not as comprehensive as AutoFPS. It's not quite as transparent, because with AutoFPS it really shows you all the figures. It shows you what it's doing in real time. It's really nice to have that. It feels like with this solution, you've kind of just got to trust it. I think for the most part it's doing terrain level of detail and object level of detail in the background, but whatever it's doing, it does seem to help. Like the without it, we were struggling a lot at Edinburgh in the Fenix. We were struggling a lot at JFK in the A330, particularly after takeoff in the A330. And simply by flicking that switch, it really helped us out a lot. Maybe not quite as much as AutoFPS, but it got us a substantial way of the way there. Without you really needing to know about third-party add-ons for the sim. So if you're kind of not comfortable doing that stuff, just flick that switch. This will get you a lot of the way there for free, basically. So I really recommend you give it a go if you haven't already, and obviously if you're an AutoFPS user, you're probably going to want to stick with that. It's a really nice add-on. I'd love to see Asobo maybe work directly with AutoFPS, because I feel like the tool is so strong. It'd be really nice to bring that into the fold, much like a lot of other add-ons saw with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for watching. I'm going to leave this one here. I hope you found the video useful. If you have, leaving a like helps the video and the channel a ton, and get subbed so you don't miss any future content. I'm going to stop rambling. I'll see you next time, but until then, take the very best care of yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, happy flying.